So Glacier, okay, so we already talked about it, but there are a couple of slides which I can quickly walk through. We have got 8 minutes. Okay. Okay, so Glacier was a separate service couple of years back, but now it's an integrated service within your S3. So where if you want to store long-term storage or long-term data, and you want to save a lot of cost, so S3 Glacier is similarly similar in nature to your S3 standard in terms of durability, availability, and security. But only thing is, this is a low-cost storage option for archival requirement for your customer. If your data has to be stored for 10 years, 15 years for long-term retention requirement, then instead of storing your data on S3 standard, you can store it in archival option. And there are a lot of analytics information and stuff that are available in the portal. So if you go to S3 on the left, you can see storage lens, and you can also see the different options that you can use for getting the insights, what kind of data is stored. The reporting is also available. There are powerful analytics that are inbuilt in S3. Okay, so usage is mainly to store the data in for your long-term requirement, and here the data will be stored in archives. It's like a kind of compressed zip file. It's an archive content, it's not a regular content. So that's the reason we need to retrieve it. Okay, so behind the scene, AWS uses something called vault. Like here for S3 standard, we are using objects, right? So here for archive, AWS or Azure or any customers, they will be using Vault for archive, right? So vaults will be used, and the archive is a kind of a compressed content, right? It will be a kind of single file which is combined together to save the cost for you, and for the provider also, they will have reduced consumption on the data level. And if you want to recover the data, you'll have to go through a retrieval procedure. And as I told you earlier, retrieval has multiple option. If a customer is expedited, I mean they're looking for expedited retrieval, that is also available, but at a extra cost, right? Immediately they will retrieve and restore it, but there will be a additional cost because you are expediting it, right? And if you're going for the standard retrieval or bulk retrieval, the charges are very minimal compared to the expedited retrieval. Even you can do a bulk retrieval also. If you have lot of data to retrieve in a quick interval, you can go and say I need a bulk retrieval request, and you can get it. So Glacier also provides you 99.99 of durability similar to S3 standard, and also it provides you very good high availability. It is storing the data in three different physical facilities, three different physical data centers that are geographically separated, right, within a particular region. Security wise, you get the option to provide permissions, policies. You can also enable lock for your storage, so that accidental modification and changes can also be avoided. So S3 Glacier is a storage class intended for long-term storage and for archival solution. So instant retrieval, you can instantly retrieve your data when customer needs it. In few milliseconds, you can retrieve it. It also provides you the same level of durability. It is the fastest access to archive storage. So it will be almost similar to S3 standard and standard IA, but of course there will be some latency difference and performance difference. But most of the medical records, the satellite images, the consumer photos, the videos, the broadcast media. So these are all the data that generally comes to the archival data, because these are all not regularly needed, right? The medical record might be needed once in 3 years or 5 years when the patient visits the hospital again, or similarly when you're talking about some older broadcast media. So not all the evidences are needed immediately, right? When there is a auditing, or when someone wants to look into the old media, like which was broadcasted last year or prior to that, then those data will be here. Even if you want to look into some last year or 3 years back sales data, or banking transaction data, so those will be archived actually. So those are all the content which generally ends up with Glacier Instance Archive. There is a minimum size for that file. See, even if you store 10 KB of file, the file size will be counted as 128 KB. Even if you are storing 30 KB or 50 KB, the minimum file size that will be counted or taken into consideration for billing is 128 KB. But it is very, very cheap. I showed you the pricing, right? It is three zeros, it is 0009, right? So it is pretty cheap, but there is a restriction, or there is a limitation on while you are storing one, I mean, even smaller files also, 1 KB, 2 KB files also will be considered as 128 KB. So there will be some discussions with the customer if they don't understand it, right? Sometimes account team will come with these questions, and you should, I mean, you have to tell them upfront that there is a minimum object size requirement when you are storing it in Glacier. But it is very, very rare scenario that they will question you, because the pricing is pretty cheap. It won't be questioned that much. So it also supports encryption. It also supports data transit encryption, and data when it is stored also it can be encrypted. So it supports secure sockets layer. When you are transferring the data also, it will be encrypted while it is in transit. So these are the some use cases that are generally used for the instant retrieval category. So flexible retrieval, this is the name itself, it tells you, you get a lot of flexibility. You can expedite the retrieval. If you want to retrieve it in 1 to 5 minutes, immediately they will start retrieving it. But if you want to wait as per their standard time, you can wait until 3 to 5 hours. Or if you want to do a large amount of data in bulk retrieval, the SLA is 5 to 12 hours. So based on the requirement, you can go and choose the retrieval option. So that option is available in flexible retrieval option. So minutes to 12 hours time. So you can start the retrieval as quick as a minute. They will immediately start restoring the data if you're going and placing a expedited retrieval, immediate retrieval. But if you are just leaving it for a large amount of data to be retrieved, it can take up to 12 hours for them to retrieve the information. Okay, but again, these are all response time is what we are talking about. But sometimes it might take more time if you are having a large amount of data to be retrieved. Deep archive is something, there are only two options. There is no expedited option in deep archive. Deep archive provides you very, very cheap cost. If you want to store the data for 10 years, 7 years, and very long term storages, deep archive is the best option. They will be using cold line disk, and the data preservation cost is very, very low, right? And this is mainly, again, the retrieval time will be 12 hours, and it can take up to 48 hours, because this is deep archive. Deep archive is stored in a cold line disk, and the retrieval time will take a lot of time. So standard will take up to 12 hours, and the bulk retrieval can take up to 2 days, right? To start it. So these are the main three options that we have. And when it comes to monitoring and compliance, all the options has got the same monitoring and compliance options. Reporting options is also same. So you get a lot of integration with CloudWatch, CloudTrail. So all the logs, all the changes that you are making, all the API calls that you are making, everything is getting logged in CloudTrail. So you will know who accessed it, who modified it, what time, from which PC, from which location. All these options are available for future auditing and monitoring data as much as you need. And also it obeys a lot of different industry standard compliance requirement. It has General Data Protection Act. It has got payment card industry, HIPAA, FedRAMP, FISMA. So a lot of compliance standards are already met by all the storage classes in S3. And AWS also provides you S3 object lock, where you want to avoid any modification. You can also write once, and read many option can also be enabled. There is an object lock option which can help you to avoid any accidental modification or deletion for your content somewhere. I think check lock. So that option is there, where you can go and lock your stuff. So once you, after you write it, you can read it as many times as you want it. But then yeah, here it is. So it says write once, read many. So if you want to enable this option, you can enable it. So once after you write the data, you will be able to read it as many times, but you cannot delete it, or you will not be able to overwrite it. There are such data, like for example, the medical records, or the broadcast media. So you don't want anyone to change it, right? Because very critical information about your patient, or your past uh, media. So if someone goes and tamper it, or changes it, it's a risk, right? So you can also go and enable that object lock. So that way it will ensure the warm capabilities, write once, read many. So pricing, I told you already. So the S3 standard has got little higher pricing, but when it comes to Glacier, the pricing is different between these three options. And Glacier Deep Archive is the cheapest of the option. It is 0009, right? That uh, cheaper it is. So any questions on what we have discussed today? So buckets, object, versioning, permission, archival storage. So this is what we thought of discussing today. Tomorrow we will discuss the elastic file system, the file storage category. So we are over time by 2 minutes, but yeah, I'm here for 3 more minutes. If you have any questions, you can stay back, or else thank you for joining. We will continue our discussion tomorrow on file storage. Okay, I'll stop the recording. It will be cheaper compared to the standard option, because you are just storing it in one single data center. And this one for the Glacier instance retrieval, Glacier is option is for long-term storage. Okay, it is for the archival and long-term storage requirement. You go for Glacier. So here, if you look at the Glacier option, it is instant retrieval. It is for the long-term data, long-lived archive data. But if you want to access the data, you cannot access it immediately, because it is like a archiving solution or a backup solution, where if you want to access it, you have to wait for some time, right? It will. There is a capacity cost for this. So if you just look at the pricing. So when you want to do the retrieval, there is a cost for the retrieval data, but the storage cost is very, very less. But there is a retrieval fee for these categories, like for the Glacier instant retrieval, Glacier flexible retrieval, and for these options, there is a retrieval fee attached. It's like a restoration fee, I would say. Okay, so for retrieval, there is a fee associated to these things. Okay, and if you read the options here, there is one more important catch on these different options. So Glacier Deep Archive is pretty much very, very cheap option. But if you want to store long-lived access data, but less than once a year with retrieval of hours. So if you access it and retrieve it once in a year and with less than a hours requirement, you can go for Glacier Deep Archive. So reduced redundancy is only for cost optimization. Okay, when customer is asking for um, less cost and the non-critical and frequently accessed data. So for non-critical data, you can go for reduced redundancy option. Reduced redundancy is much cheaper, but it doesn't give you as many amount of durability and availability of your data, because the name itself, it says reduced redundancy. The redundancy number of copies will be reduced. That way you will get a very less pricing. And out of these three Glacier option, so if you are these two options, right? Glacier flexible retrieval and Glacier deep retrieval. The important difference is, from the name itself, you can see it is flexible retrieval. Flexible means you can go and choose how quickly you want to recover the data. Okay, whether you want to recover it within minutes or within hours. If your data is restoration is very vital and the business is waiting for it, so Glacier flexible retrieval gives you an advantage that you can go and quickly recover the data compared to the deep archive option. But instant retrieval, by the name itself, it is instantly retrievable. Retrieval means, like, we have stored the data in long-term storage, archival storage, and we can go and quickly retrieve the data, recover the data when business is needing it. So S3 provides a lot of options, a lot of storage classes for different storage requirements and access requirement. You can go and store it. So standard is the standard option, where the pricing and the performance is comparatively better. And as we move down, these are all for long-term storages and for cost optimized option. And one more important option here you need to notice it, when you are storing the data in some of these options, when you are putting the data in Glacier and Glacier Deep Archive, there is a minimum number of days that you have to store the data. So for example, Glacier instant retrieval and flexible retrieval, if you are going and storing the data, minimum you have to store the data for 90 days. If you are storing it and deleting it, let's say like after 60 days or 30 days, the minimum number of days, the remaining number of days, you have to pay the pro rata charges, early deletion charges. So early deletion charges are applicable here because you are committing for storing the data for long term, and AWS is providing you for very, very cheaper cost. It's like dead cheaper. I will show you the pricing. So it's pretty much very cheap, and when they give it for that pricing, then if you are storing the data for 30 days and deleting it, it doesn't give them any benefit. So if you are deleting the data from Glacier before the minimum number of days, then early deletion charges or pro rata charges will be applicable for all these options. So even for these category also, the minimum number of days that you want to have to store is 30 days. For infrequently accessed data, minimum number of days is 30. For Glacier Instant and Glacier Flexible Retrieval option, minimum number of days is 90, and Glacier Deep Archive, it is 180 days. There might be some questions on the cloud practitioner and sysops exam, but for solutions architect, I don't recall questions around the days, but you need to choose the specific option based on the customer access requirement, whether they want to store infrequently accessed data or frequently accessed data, or archive long-term data, whether they need multiple copies, whether they want cost optimization in the storage. So for every single customer unique needs, AWS has storage classes that can fulfill different options. And most of the use cases you can fit in with general purpose and standard. 80% you can fit in with that, but from specific use cases based on the criticality, business requirement, you can go and change and choose the options. So any questions so far before we get into the pricing for storage? Okay, I'll take that as no. Just one second. Okay, pricing. Okay, you can go to the pricing calculator tool, or you can also cloud object storage Amazon S3 comparison screen also. So these are some use cases. Okay. So if you look at here, by default, Amazon S3 provides you 12 months of free tier, and you can store up to 5 GB in standard, and you can do 20,000 get request and 2,000 put copy post request. So these are all free charges. Okay. So these are all free of cost. If you are utilizing only that limit, then it is free of charge. But if you want to understand the different other categories, so you need to understand the pattern and the data transfer and other mechanisms. So let's wait here. It's something is loading. Yeah. So this is the pricing you need to be aware of. So if you are talking about S3 standard, you can see the pricing is pretty much very low for the put copy and stuff. But if you are talking about Glacier and the archive solution, then the retrieval cost will be little higher, right? So for the Glacier and the expedited retrieval, bulk retrieval options, the pricing is there. But for the standard storage, retrieval prices are not applicable because you can store it and access it and anytime on the standard, intelligent tiering and these options, or standard tiering option. Whenever you want to store it, you can store it and access it anytime, anywhere you want. But Glacier is meant for long-term retention, and this involves retrieval time and delay. So for some customers, they might say, I need expedited retrieval. My business is waiting for this data to be available. And if you want to do expedited retrieval, there is a special charge for that. And if it is a standard retrieval, it is comparatively cheaper. And if you want to do a bulk retrieval of large data, then the prices are pretty much lesser, right? So there are some specific options which you need to be aware of. Let me So this is per region, right? The cost will, I mean, every storage, I mean, every AWS component product cost differs region to region. So if you talk about one region, Americas, and if you talk about Mumbai or Singapore, the pricing will be comparatively different. Okay, I'll come to that shortly. See, when it comes to S3 standard storage, the first 50 terabyte is 0.023 per GB, right? And then the more you use, the more you store, the price is lesser, right? So after the next 450 terabyte is cheaper, and then the next 500 terabyte is little more cheaper. So the more you store, the more you consume, the price is cheaper in when it comes to storage. Similarly here for intelligent tiering, the price is this much. And if you talk about the Glacier and other option, it is very very cheap. So if you look at the Glacier instant retrieval, it is 0.004 GB per GB. It is 0.0009, right? So it is very very dead cheap kind of option. So per GB there is a considerable difference if you are using standard and the Glacier options. Glacier options are very very cheap when it comes to storing the data, but when you want to retrieve the data, there is price attached to it. But you are not going to retrieve the data on a regular basis. It might be once in a year or once in 2 years you might go and retrieve the data, so for which there is a charges, there is a considerable charge for the Glacier concept. But for standard, the storing and the accessing price is pretty much